Hello and welcome to the Sport for Business Daily. Delighted to be joined this morning by a person who is right up there as amongst one of my favourite interviews that I ever did on stage in RTE at the Women in Sport Conference. Joanne O'Riordan, you're very welcome to Sport for Business again.
Thanks very much, Rob. I was going to say you're taking my job very quickly. You're doing a better job than I am 99% of the time.
I very much doubt that. Tell me something. We're talking about you're going to be appearing at Leaders Lounge 2 next week, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But one of the things that intrigues me about you at the moment is that not only are you a great interviewee, but you're also becoming a top-class interviewer. So in the Irish Times this morning, you're in print there interviewing Kristen Press, one of the World Cup winners from the US women's national team, and a genuine superstar in world sport. How do you find that sort of putting on one hat of asking the questions and then putting on the other of answering them?
I suppose for me, well, first of all, I need to say that Kristen Press did 99% of the work. Like, she's so profound and eloquent in the way that she talks and her entire thought process. Like, it's easy to know she's a Stanford graduate. So she did like the work anyways for me on my end. I just had to put pen to paper and frame it in a good way. But well, first of all, thanks for saying I'm one of the top. I would like to say that I'm learning as I go along, and I'm still not really too sure how I suppose I want to be viewed as an interviewer anyways myself. I suppose I've learned a bunch of things throughout my time, in that, silence is the best time, just to kind of sit and kind of let them talk. And it's something that I would have learned too, when I was being interviewed, that sometimes I felt a little bit awkward if there was a silence. And I used to just try and fill the void myself. So I've kind of used that tactic a little bit. I suppose I'm very fortunate that I have some incredible mentors in the Irish Times who've given me incredible advice. Some of the good stuff that I've heard is, there's nothing better than an after party, which is when you stop recording and the person will tell you something. And obviously you can't use it as a direct quote, but you can use it to frame an article in a way, that you can be like, I've totally got this information anyway, irrespective of the interview. So yeah, just kind of different things like that, I suppose. But one thing that I hope to be anyways as an interviewer, and something I strive to, is just to not be the story, to just take myself away from it and just to let them tell their story to me. And for me, just to kind of help them open up if they're uncomfortable or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know if I've been lucky anyway so far. I've definitely got to interview some amazing people and some absolute heroes of mine. My first interview was probably this time last year, actually, in lockdown. It was with Bob Rotella, a golf psychologist. And I was always interested in golf psychology anyway. And that was my first one. And like, to be really honest with you, I nearly pooped my pants because it was my first big time interview and I didn't know what I was doing, to be exact. And, afterwards then, I just got to meet so many people, Kelly's daughter, Kelly Nascimento De Luca, is another one. She's an incredible storyteller. She's a director of women's sports documentaries and stuff like that, and an advocate for access for women in sports down in Brazil and in America. One of my other favorite interviews has been with Natalie Achanwa. She's a Canadian women's basketball player, and she spoke to me about her why. And she basically was saying that she's a basketballer, for the young kids growing up in Canada who want to aspire to be like her, who see a black girl with curly hair, winning titles and doing the best that she can be and changing society with it. So interviews like that, I suppose, stick with me more so rather than just telling a story of a game. But yeah, I've been incredibly fortunate as well over in her sport. We've interviewed some incredible people. We've interviewed Chanelle McCoy, obviously, for Leaders Lounge. We interviewed Amy Mackin as well this morning. Grace Walsh was another one. So Sarah McDonald, she's a runner, and she shared her story of being assaulted on the street while out running. So really, like, incredible interviews and stuff that you're not really dealing with all the time. But as I said, for me, it's just important to not make myself the storyline and to not interject, and to just make sure it is their story I'm telling, and not having it as, I call it the Will Smith effect. When you watch a film with Will Smith in it, it's always like Will Smith is playing. I don't want to be like Will Smith is playing. Like, I want to be, the character rather than the Will Smith is playing.
I'll betray my age now. I'm the same with Sean Connery. Sean Connery always plays Sean Connery, no matter what part he's in the movie. Same difference. That idea of getting the interview, preparing for the interview, what's on the public record about a person, but the ability to actually get them to share something of themselves. Is that something that you've learned? Is it something that you get excited by when people tell you something that you didn't know?
Yeah, it is definitely really exciting. And, sometimes I think I used to over prepare in the past. So I used to always have the information at hand. So I wouldn't ask the question because I'd know it. And in my head, I'd be like, well, everyone else clearly knows it if I know it. But I think the whole point of an interview, and I remember I think it was Luigi Fogarty who said it to me years ago. He was like, you have to understand, like people reading and people listening to the radio and people watching on television, you really have to treat them like idiots, and not in a bad way. You just have to make sure everything is accessible to everyone. And by that, you have to kind of dumb it down to the lowest ebb. And I remember I did a cricket interview with Ed Joyce and Laura Delaney, current Irish captain and Irish manager of the women's team. And I have no idea about cricket, and I said that to them as they came in. I was like, I have no idea about cricket. So if I ask you a really stupid question, feel free to tell me that's a really stupid question. And lo and behold, we ended up getting a really good interview about like the pure basics of cricket more than anything else. It wasn't anything too in depth about tactics. It wasn't anything, that could confuse everyone. When my producer listened back to it, at Red FM, he basically was like, this is what sport should be. Like, it should be accessible to everyone, and you shouldn't necessarily keep people out because they're too stupid or whatever to understand tactics, because God knows I am sometimes. And I think that we already have such great writers and such great people on TV who can express to us about tactics, and people who can delve into that and explain it for the rest of us. And I think I know my role in that I'm not one of those people. And I'm happy enough to just showcase, the pure basics and make sure it's accessible for everyone. But yeah, like in terms of preparing, I think sometimes it's best to just have a few basic questions down, but also in the back of your mind to sometimes it's better to not have any questions, because it forces you to listen rather than actually looking at what you're looking at on the notepads.
That is always one of the key things, that in order to be a good talker, you have to be a good listener. I always find that one of the beauties of sport is its proximity to humanity, and that it's much less about the scores on the board and it's about the human stories that are out there. And part of that is about the role modeling that you've spoken about with some of those that you've interviewed. You're appearing at Leaders Lounge next week in a virtual online setting. Can't wait until we get to actually meeting people back in the real world again. But you're alongside Rassie Erasmus and Chanelle McCoy and Paul McGinley and Brian O'Driscoll. It's a rock star lineup. Who are you most excited about hearing from yourself?
Yeah, I still don't understand how I got invited, but I'm taking the invite anyways from Owen Conroy. I'm like, sorry, Owen, you invited me. I got to go now. Yeah, I think really overall, I'm kind of interested in what everyone is saying. I know everyone touches upon different things. I know Rassie touches upon diversity and leadership and, working with a team, I suppose, that is incredibly diverse, from a South African rugby perspective, and how to incorporate those differences, but more importantly, to make them work. So I'm obviously interested in that from a pure fact, that I obviously advocate for diversity and inclusion, for people with disabilities. So I'd be curious to hear what he has to say, because I think some of the lessons that you learn in terms of how to apply differences in terms of race, maybe gender, sexual orientation, I think some of them can be applied anyways across the board. So I would be interested in that. I'm obviously interested in Brian because, he's an incredible leader, and he's, someone who has been at the top of his game, for so long, and someone who did thrive in some of the craziest of circumstances, winning Grand Slams, in mental conditions. So I think for him, I'd like to hear about mental fitness and, inspirational leadership that he would have had to have provided to the Irish team. I'd like to obviously understand the tips to beating Leinster, along the way. That would be great as well if he could share some of those. With Chanelle's an incredible businesswoman. She's an incredible leader in her own regard in an industry, the pharmaceutical industry, that's incredibly tough. It's incredibly male dominated, and it's very strict on results. And when I got to speak to her earlier in the week, we were talking about empathy. And obviously that was just something, that just kind of blew my mind. Because of course, to get the best sometimes out of people, you don't have to be yelling and shouting at them. You don't have to be setting targets and making them kind of stick to that targets and defining them as successes or failures then that way. And then I suppose, with Paul McGinley, incredible golfer, someone who's been at the top of his game as well. And I've always been interested in golf psychology anyways, like how an individual has such control over results and an outcome, and how your mind is so important in defining what is happening in the end, in terms of golf, and how that applies to the real business world as well.
Paul's attention to detail is astonishing. I was lucky enough to interview him on stage a couple of years back, and his grasp of the technicalities of golf course management, of human nature, exceptional. He's a very, very interesting guy, as indeed is the whole lineup. Tell us a little bit, without giving too much away, what are some of the things that you're hoping to share and looking to let people know about the world of Joanne O'Riordan?
Oh God, I suppose at Leaders Lounge next week, they're aiming to look at situational and inspirational leadership is their two themes that they've given us. So I suppose an example of how must you, I suppose from my point of view as an advocate for people with disabilities and as someone who's trying to break into the sports world at the minute, in a world that isn't necessarily catering to my needs anyways, I suppose really the thing that I want to like drive home is that in any leadership situation, especially when it comes to advocacy, you have to adapt yourself. And you have to basically not be afraid to put out a plan that you know is probably going to be wrong. You know, when you're trying to cater to 250,000 people in Ireland who live with a disability, I think it's 1 billion globally. It's a quarter of the global population anyways. You're going to get it wrong, you know, because you can only talk about it from your perspective and, you know, what you enjoy as a person with a disability. And this is the same for humanity across the board. Does not necessarily mean that the other person will enjoy it as well. I like sports. Someone without limbs may not like sports. You know, and that's already a big difference there. And there's only 7 of us in the world. So I think it is important to just be able to, with an open mind, know that probably what you're suggesting is going to be wrong, but also to not fear being wrong. Because I think sometimes you can grow, and when you accept that you may be wrong, you go in with good compassion, you go in with, you know, in good faith, and it's all an organic kind of relationship, and you can kind of grow together and see obviously then where that takes you, which I think is something we do need in businesses, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion. We all think we have, you know, the right blueprint or the right template or whatever it may be, and all it takes is one person with no limbs to come in and be like, I can't fit into the toilet, and everything goes up in the air. So I think basically, yeah, situational for me is just about adapting, being able to adapt your leadership skills and being able to see, right, what structure works well here, and what can I take that can, you know, work well in other places. And then I suppose in terms of inspirational, for me, I think irrespective of my story, I think there are so many ordinary people anyways doing extraordinary things. And I think that's one thing that I want to drive home. You don't have to be Brian O'Driscoll. You don't have to be Rassie. You don't have to be Paul McGinley. You don't have to be Chanelle. You don't have to go to the United Nations. If you do one small thing in the world, that could have a massive impact. And I think if we all strive to have the mindset of we're on the planet and we have to strive to leave it in a better place than how we got it, and that's not even like talking about big major things we have to do, then I think anything then is possible. And I think if we all just kind of stay present and we all know our why and understand our why, I think it is, you know, super important. And I think then, you know, then we start to see miracles and growth and everything kind of come into place. And yeah, I get to kind of take it from there and see what happens.
I think you're going to be the star of the show next Thursday afternoon, no matter that some of them might have more millions in the bank and more World Cup medals and Heineken Cup medals on the mantelpiece. I'm looking forward to hearing all of that and more from you. If you want to learn about leadership from Joanne O'Riordan, Leaders Lounge 2 is on next Thursday afternoon. You can find all the details on the Sport for Business website or the Leaders Lounge website as well. Use the code SFB2021 and you get a 15% discount on the price of the ticket as well. If, on the other hand, you want to learn a little bit more about Joanne O'Riordan and dating, I would heartily recommend listening to the Mario Rosenstock podcast, which is out there at the moment, produced by a good friend, Patrick Haughey. Very, very funny. Joanne, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. It has been again this morning. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Rob.